You might notice that when we built our application, we got 4 files here in my case, and the biggest file is, in my case, this chunk here with 52.24 kilobytes. Now that is not a problem, this is not too large, but in bigger applications, of course, this might be bigger. And one problem, if you want to call it like this, which we have in this application, in this React application, is that we're not splitting our code. Now what does code splitting mean? It means that not all code is required right from the start. If a user visits our page, he or she might be logged in automatically, or he or she might not be. No matter if that's the case or not, we might not yet have visited the places for one of our users. We might not yet have visited the auth page. So the code that is related to authentication and to user places, or the code which is related to creating a new place or for updating a place, might not be needed yet. It is needed once we visit that page, once we navigate to places new, but not before we do so. And therefore, we could load these routes lazily, which means initially when our app starts, we don't download the code for these routes, but as soon as a user goes there, we download the code on the fly and then render these pages, so that the initial page loading time is reduced because we download less code initially. And React thankfully has built-in support for code splitting. So how do we set this up in React? In the app.js file, I will create a new constant here, one for each route which I want to load lazily. For example, users. And then we can comment out or remove this import here. And users can now be created with React.lazy. And React.lazy takes a function. And this is a function which executes import as a function. So import not as a statement like this, but as a function instead. This is also supported in modern JavaScript and also in this React build setup here. And there, we pass a path to the file we want to import. So that path here in the end. Now the difference is that now this is not imported immediately when app.js runs, and therefore in the bundle produced here by our build tool, it's not included right from the start, but it will be loaded on demand once this user component is required, this user's component, excuse me. And we still render this as a regular component. React.lazy does the rest. So down there, we don't need to change how we use that. We just change how we import it. And now, of course, we replicate this also for a new place, where I grab this path and use it here. And let's comment this out. Also for user places, where I grab this path here and use it there. And also for update place here, grab this, replace it there. And then I want to do the very same with auth, like this. Now, not all lazy loaded routes I set up here make sense. For example, users is the route we load by default at the beginning, so we don't actually need to lazy load that. We can still do it though. But other routes like new place or update place make a lot of sense because we definitely don't load them initially when the app starts up, so there is no need in loading this in advance. Now you don't need to use a similar syntax in the other React files because this really only works with the routing here at the moment. And in addition, this is our biggest opportunity for splitting our code into meaningful chunks for the different features of our application. So we only need to do this here in app.js. However, like this it wouldn't work. We now have to do something else. We have to wrap our routes, which we render in the end, with another component which we get from React. We import it from React, and that's the suspense component. Suspense is required to make React.lazy work. So we wrap this here, our routes, with suspense. So your lazy loaded code is wrapped with suspense. And on suspense, you provide a fallback prop. And this has to point at some JSX code which is rendered as a fallback if loading lazy loaded code takes longer. So if downloading that code for that new route the user wants to go to, if that takes longer, React shows the JSX code you render here in between. There we could render a div with a class name with a class name of center, let's say, and then our loading spinner. For that, just make sure that you, of course, also import the loading spinner here. We need to import this from the shared components UI elements folder, and then we can render it here as a fallback if loading of a route should take longer. With that, let's test it locally. So I will use npm start again to build our app for development so that we can test it here on localhost. And let's wait for this application to reload. Now you see, it starts up, I'm logged in, but now something interesting happens. If I clear my network tab, if I go to add place, you see there are new downloads of these chunks. And that in the end are the code chunks that are required for this page. And if we go to authentication, for example, a new chunk was downloaded. So this is the code splitting in action. These are the different code chunks for the different feature areas we have. And therefore now if we quit this and we run npm run build again, we will also see that for production, different chunks are produced. Now the entire when to load what thing will be managed by React. You don't have to worry about that. Therefore, you get a free win here. You got more code files, as you can see. More chunks were created. And therefore, the initial chunk decreased a bit. Now, it's still almost the same size as before, because the majority of this size is actually taken up by the React library itself, and by other third-party libraries we included. But still, we're able to get some improvements out of this here. And on bigger apps, of course, the improvements would be way bigger, because you would be able to get way bigger chunks out of there. In an app like this, where the third-party libraries make up the majority of the code, of course, you don't gain that much. Still, it is important to know this technique. And with that, I would say our React app is looking quite decent. We're ready to deploy it. And to deploy it, we need to understand which two different options or which two different main options we have for deploying it.